So you just recorded a podcast, you pressed stop, you already know you hate it. Do not delete that recording, and I'm gonna tell you why. Hey everyone, before we get into what to do with those abysmal recordings of you and your initial podcast efforts, you gotta know who I am. My name is Rich Cardona. I am a podcaster, and my team and I produce some of the world's top podcasts, and we love what we do. We obsess over it, and we're just trying to give as much information as possible to you, whether you're in the beginning of your journey, whether you're novice, or whether you're advanced. All the information helps in the podcast world. Now, let's get back to your YouTube video or your recording that you absolutely hated. What are you going to do with it? And I had to take some notes, and I wanted to kind of share this with you step by step on some of the things you can do. Watch it, listen to it, and list every single thing that you don't like about it. And this may be 3 things, this may be 50 things, depending on your self-consciousness. It could be a lot, okay? But one thing I can tell you, a lot of people don't do, even though they just recorded it, they know how they sounded, they know how they looked, and it's fresh, they still miss certain things, okay? Like, you are gonna pick up on so many details as you watch it, and you're also gonna be on the lookout for things that went well. That's obviously just as important as some of the things that you don't want to do in the future. The second thing I would like for you to do, after you've kind of aggregated this list of just self-deprecating talk about your podcast abilities, is ask yourself the following question. How much of my non-existent audience cares about this? Okay? You don't have an audience yet, if you're just starting out especially, and if you have a big, huge audience, you're probably in a position where you're already gonna be getting feedback. But if not, this is just how it goes in the beginning, and you cannot imagine that there is just a stadium full of people who are watching this on a big screen, because that's just exactly what's not happening. What's probably happening is the people who are your friends and family that you basically forced to listen to your podcast, listen, okay? But look, your non-existent audience isn't gonna care. You're the only person who cares, and this is just an example of how we could get in our own way. I've been making a lot of content recently, like on my Instagram stories, which you could follow me at @richcardona_, but how often on a given day do we talk ourselves out of something we want? Let me give you the simplest example of this. Joe and I could go to lunch right now, okay? Right after this, be like, man, let's go eat, man. I want a burger or grilled cheese or whatever it is. Let's just say I order a BLT, and I get it, and there's 1 slice of bacon on that thing. If I'm, kind of passive, I'm just gonna say, I guess that's just how they do it. I'm talking myself out of what I want, which is a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, which means I'm gonna need some more bacon. So we find reasons to deny ourselves what we want. So you are gonna have that negative self-talk about what people are gonna think when there's probably not anyone listening anyway. And even if they are, you have to focus on what you want and what you want to achieve with the podcast in order for it to actually get the traction it needs at some point. So you've made your list, and now you're gonna ask yourself, how much of my non-existent audience cares about this? And you're gonna quickly be reminded that it is you that's in the way, that things are supposed to be imperfect, and polished is not authentic. That's why we're authentic in what we do. We don't even take ums and ahs out of podcasts for our clients, because no, if they meet you in real life, like, the conversation should be as real as possible, and they're gonna be thrown off if you're not talking perfectly like a robot. Here's another thing, use it later. Use the video podcast or the podcast for later, meaning, like, once you're 100 episodes in, you could make that post like, wow, I hit such a huge milestone. Check out this episode that I never actually published because I was scared shit. Go ahead, publish it. And people are gonna be like, wow, you've come such a long way, or people are gonna laugh at it, or people are gonna just join you in the fun. Instead of, being self-deprecating, you're actually making light of a situation, and you're showing that you're just real, that you started somewhere. Everyone starts at 0, so just admit it and save it for later on for when you do hit that milestone. Another reason you shouldn't delete it is because instead of waiting till you get 100 episodes, you could post it. You could post it and be like, hey, existing audience on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, like, I'm starting this podcast and I want to absolutely smash it. But here's 5 minutes of what I actually recorded, and I would love to just send this into outer space so it never gets discovered. But I think what I can do is get your feedback from it. What do you like? What do you not like? enlist your audience. People are going to be critical, have the thick skin, but people may also tell you things that they like that you didn't like. That actually matters. So go ahead and post it if you want. Be like, look, I'm not publishing yet until I get a couple more things squared away, and I'd love for you to be part of the process. Then you may have not only invested people, but invested listeners for when you actually do launch because they were part of the process. So we've covered 4 things so far. If you're getting any value out of this, by the way, go ahead and make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification button for more up-to-date personal branding, video podcast information. But we've covered the fact that you should list all the things you like and don't like after you've listened or watched it again. The second thing you're going to do is ask yourself if your non-existent audience actually cares about this. Third thing you can do is save it and post it for when you hit a podcast milestone. Or number 4 is you could post it now and actually get help in the development of the podcast from your audience and not necessarily someone like us. So I'm going to talk to you about a few things you can look out for. I'm telling you, I implore you to just watch this thing, man. Like, just everyone is self-conscious. I'm on camera right now. I've been on camera a million times, and I cannot tell you how much I just cringe when I watch some of my stuff, but it's mandatory in order to get better. Here are some of the things you should be looking for. Number 1 is pet words and pet phrases. Like, all that kind of stuff, okay? These are the things that you will want to potentially eliminate from your vocabulary if it is excessive and distracting. This also includes swearing. I used to swear a lot, okay? And now I'm saved, I'm a different man, but from time to time it slips out because they're just good adjectives. You can look into that and see if it's distracting, okay? See if it's distracting for you, see if it's distracting for anyone else. And the way to improve on this and pet phrases, which pet phrases I'll just cover really quick. I like to say, you know what I mean? Or does that make sense? Or right? These are just things, they're filler words. We do it unconsciously and we just do it while we're thinking. So all you're doing is processing out loud. You're gathering your next thought and you're using a word or a phrase to kind of fill that gap. It doesn't make you unprofessional. It doesn't make you a bad podcast host. It doesn't mean you don't belong on video. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean you need to edit it out either, especially, like I said, if you post it later for posterity. But if you want to kind of solve that problem, oh, I just got vanilla ice by it, just slow down. And I think I've mentioned this in another video before, but if not, if you find yourself talking at 0.75 speed, so that way you could actually convey the information without all the screw ups, you can make the speed of that track a little bit faster in post. I don't really suggest that, but you could absolutely do that if you just feel like it's dragging. So number 1 is check those pet phrases, check those pet words, slow down, listen back, just take note of it. Another thing you can do is look at eye contact. Now, eye contact is important for videos like this, but on a podcast, really, really challenging because 9 times out of 10, especially if you're using kind of a virtual setup, you're going to be looking at the camera, okay, which is probably above the screen because it can't be eye level with you, and the person or your monitor is going to be eye level. So you're actually looking down, okay? So when the person's talking to you, you're actually doing something like this. Like I'm just looking like a few inches down when the camera's actually right here. So for virtual recording, consider the eye contact you're making, especially if it's a solo podcast and there's no one else with you. You need to be looking into the lens and not at the screen. This is gonna foster a better connection between you and I. So pay attention to eye contact. Pay attention to gestures. If you're using gestures, make sure they actually mean something. So if I'm talking about how small something was, that makes sense. If I'm talking about how small something was, that doesn't make sense. If you are a hand gestury person, is that a word, hand gestury? If you're a hand gestury person and you just use those a lot in how you speak, if you're Hispanic like I am, or you're Italiano and that's just how you roll, just make sure it makes sense and you don't have to do it for everything. Keep an eye on your hand gestures. There's probably a lot more. Leave me comments, leave me questions, DM me, email us at info@richcardonamedia.com if there's anything we left out, because there's probably a ton. The last thing I would say is the speed, okay? The speed of your podcast or your interview questions and all that kind of stuff. You don't need to fly through it because your nerves are out of whack. This is when we get into that place where pet phrases and pet words come into play. Same concept here. If you slow down, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So don't be in a rush to get the podcast over. Don't be in a rush to ask your question. Take a couple breaths of air when you need to from time to time, and just make sure the cadence is going. Now, here is a pro tip for you if you are interviewing someone. If I'm interviewing Joe and I'm talking to him about his aspirations to be film and to be a filmmaker and to make incredible content, then I'm gonna let Joe speak 90% of the time. That is a sign of a good host. I should be talking about 10% of the time, and I'm gonna make it a point to try and not inject my own personal anecdotes in there unless it is truly a value add for the audience. The spotlight should be on the other person, so in terms of the cadence for that, keep your questions to a minimum as much as possible. Make sure they're good, make sure they're relevant, and make sure they either highlight two things if this is Joe. His personality, why he gets so amped up about film and filming and lighting, and the other thing is about his expertise. Okay, let's make sure we're highlighting his expertise. As much as a podcast should be conversational, it should be valuable conversation. The rapport you build with someone is great, but if that rapport is legit, then after you're done recording, you guys could talk for another 5, 10, 30 minutes, who knows? And maybe you just made a new friend, or maybe you just added someone valuable to your network. So that's a total aside. But if you don't like what you just recorded, you don't have to flush it down the toilet, okay? Look at it, study it, learn how it can help you to be a better podcaster, and let your audience weigh in on it if you're up for that, because I think that is truly where the value is.